Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am a student of war, but unfortunately, all of us are students of war, whether we like it or not. We cannot turn on our television sets or log on to the internet today without being bombarded by the incessant imagery of maps and photographs depicting which corner of the world is under bombardment. At the same time, we assure ourselves that we abhor violence or rationalize it for some greater need. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, not many of you here can deny that you have paid good money or spent some time being entertained by a war movie. Furthermore, our philosophical, legal, even spiritual views in the world are informed by violence. It is so ubiquitous that we believe we understand it. September this year will mark the end of the Second World War. It's been 70 years since the end of World War II. 60 to 80 million people were claimed by this war. 4/5 of the world's surface was ravaged. Places as far away as Alaska, Tunisia, Australia, and the Solomon Islands, not to mention London itself, were unspared by the scourge of this war. And of the 60 to 80 million people that were killed, 62% were civilians. Now, I'm not here to reel off a series of statistics for the next 6 minutes telling you about the intricacies of the Second World War. Instead, I'm here to point out a very dangerous and perpetual missing link, not only in our understanding of the Second World War, but indeed in all wars. I may have been 6 when I first heard of the Second World War. It wasn't from a textbook. It wasn't from a movie. My grandfather was a veteran of World War II. He was one of 2.5 million Indian soldiers that served in the British Empire against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And look at how sterile I just sounded, ladies and gentlemen. My grandfather was one of millions who served in an empire made up of millions against ideologies made up of millions more. And this is how we've come to define and shape the Second World War in our mind. Good versus evil, democracy versus unabashed evil. I don't know why my grandfather served in the Second World War. He never talked about it. Like many in his generation, he never saw himself as a hero and would have rather forgotten that he actually served in this terrible scourge of a war. But these are individuals that we should be focusing on. Speaking of individuals, we have a room not too far from here down the corner called the Churchill Room. Now here's the determined defender of British freedom holding the dikes against Nazi Germany at the height of its power in 1940. We are obsessed with these images and icons, these heroes. Hitler, Stalin, Churchill, Roosevelt, Mussolini, if you will. We're so obsessed with them that we forget that the millions that stood behind them didn't necessarily agree with them. I mentioned before that my grandfather may have been an adherent to the British Empire, or he may have been one of the few Indians that hoped that maybe after this war, South Asians could get a form of self-government. Just maybe. Likewise, the young Germans, Japanese, Italians were not all necessarily taken in by the perversion of Nazism or the mythologization of Japanese supremacy. So what we're left with is a caricature of the United Nations, mainly democracies, facing each other off against various enemies of humanity. Locked in battle, 60 to 80 million is just that, a statistic. There has to be something more to this. These two soldiers, in spite of what these posters may say, did not necessarily fight for democracy or freedom. As the only two nations, the major allied nations that were actually invaded by the Axis, these two soldiers didn't have a choice. And they weren't fighting for nationalism, Stalin, or Chiang Kai-shek. They were fighting for their survival. Hitler and Imperial Japan were on a path to annihilate these societies. They were not fighting for democracy or a better world order. They were fighting for their homes and hearths. Likewise, if we were to ask the question, which South Asian, Caribbean, African-American soldier fought for democracy? The answer is not very many. African-American soldiers weren't even given the right to fight in the Second World War until 1944 because they were considered racially inferior and therefore inept for duty. Now you may ask, ladies and gentlemen, why should we care about this? This is a historian's question and it should be relegated to the academy. You may be right until we start to look at the implications of what this understanding of the war has on our current understandings of war. So when we sterilize our historical understandings of war, we're left with figures and facts. But the Second World War wasn't figures and facts. It was a visceral war, a highly personal war. This was the first time that mass bombardment was targeting large sections of civilian quarters and cities. Entire societies were wiped out systematically. Civilians were exterminated or disaggregated in their large numbers by both sides. But what do we call them? We call it strategic and pinpoint bombing. We call it an unfortunate set of victims who were caught in the crossfire. And as for the poking remnants of London, we call it collateral damage. And this may sound fairly familiar to some of you. I started this speech with saying how we are students of war, all of us. News and the political cycles that have dominated our understandings of war today come directly from our understanding of this particular war. It has become a glamour shot, a glamorous, glorious fight for a vague notion of politics in some corner of the world. And this is the biggest travesty of them all. The missing link, ladies and gentlemen, in this regard is that we've ignored the guts of war. And by doing so, we have made it far easier to conduct it. Thank you.